Captain Lee Tae-min stood at attention in the grand conference hall of Nexus Prime, the neutral space station that served as the galaxy's diplomatic center. The massive chamber stretched before him like a metal cathedral, its walls lined with viewing screens showing the homeworlds of dozens of alien species. Today would mark humanity's first formal request to join the Galactic Council, and Lee felt the weight of his entire species resting on his shoulders. Beside him, Dr. Park So-young adjusted her diplomatic robes nervously. She had spent years studying alien cultures, preparing for this moment. Commander Kim Dong-woo, the head of Earth's delegation, remained perfectly still, his face showing no emotion. All three humans wore their finest uniforms, polished to mirror brightness. The alien representatives filled the chamber like a living museum of evolution's possibilities. The Saurid Empire delegation occupied the left side of the hall, their reptilian forms covered in gleaming scales that shifted color with their moods. General Veltar, their military commander, was particularly impressive. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his emerald scales catching the light as he moved. His eyes, cold and calculating, watched the humans with barely hidden amusement. On the right side sat the Hive Queen's representatives from the insectoid species. Kixna, their speaker, possessed 4 arms and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her chitinous exoskeleton was a work of art, with patterns that moved like living tattoos across her surface. Behind her, dozens of smaller insects hummed in perfect harmony, creating an otherworldly music. The center of the hall belonged to the Luminar Collective, beings of pure energy contained within crystalline forms. Morden, their spokesman, flickered between different colors as he communicated through light patterns that the translation devices converted to sound. His presence filled the room with a soft, pulsing glow. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Commander Kim began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. We come before you today as representatives of humanity, seeking membership in your ancient alliance. We believe our species can contribute much to the greater galactic community. General Veltar's scales shifted to a darker shade, indicating skepticism. Humans, he said, his voice like grinding stone. You are a young species. What could you possibly offer us that we do not already possess? Dr. Park stepped forward, her prepared speech ready. We offer diversity of thought, innovative problem-solving, and a unique perspective on military strategy and technology. Our species has survived through adaptation and ingenuity. Kixana's compound eyes focused on the human delegation. When she spoke, her voice was like the sound of wind through leaves. Survival is not enough. We require proof of your capabilities. What weapons do you bring to our collective defense? This was the moment Commander Kim had been waiting for. He nodded to Captain Lee, who activated a holographic projector, the center of the chamber filled with 3-dimensional images of human military history. We would like to present the evolution of our armored fighting vehicles, Lee announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. From our earliest designs to our most advanced systems, the first image appeared, showing a primitive tank from Earth's First World War. The boxy, slow-moving machine crawled across a muddy battlefield, its tracks churning through the dirt. Lee explained how humans had first developed these vehicles to break through enemy lines, protecting soldiers while delivering firepower. A ripple of what could only be described as amusement passed through the alien delegates. Several Saurid representatives hissed softly, their scales brightening with what Lee realized was laughter. The insectoids began chittering among themselves, their wings buzzing with excitement. You call this a weapon? General Veltar asked, his voice filled with disbelief. A metal box that crawls through mud like a wounded beast? Lee continued the presentation undeterred. The images changed to show World War II tanks, then Cold War designs, each more advanced than the last. He demonstrated how human engineers had improved armor, increased speed, and enhanced firepower over decades of development. The alien laughter grew louder. Kixna raised one of her forearms, her voice cutting through the noise. These crude metallurgy examples are what you consider advanced? Our bioengineered carapaces evolved past such primitive protection millions of years ago. The presentation moved forward through time, showing modern human hover tanks with energy shields and plasma cannons. Lee felt a spark of hope as the alien laughter quieted slightly. Surely they would be impressed by humanity's latest achievements. Morden pulsed, with bright yellow light, which the translator converted to words. These designs show promise, but they are merely copies of technologies we mastered eons ago. Where is your innovation? Lee's hope crumbled as he realized the aliens saw humanity's greatest achievements as poor imitations of their own work. He continued through the presentation, showing space-based combat vehicles and planetary defense systems. But the damage was done. General Veltar stood, his massive form casting a shadow over the human delegation. "Members of the Council," he announced, "we have seen enough. These humans present us with metal boxes that roll on wheels and crawl on tracks. Their most advanced designs are primitive copies of our own technologies from thousands of years past. The Saurid General gestured dismissively at the still hovering holographic images. They show us vehicles that must touch the ground to move, weapons that fire crude projectiles and armor made from simple metals. How can such a backward species contribute to our advanced civilization?" Kixna joined the criticism, her four arms weaving patterns in the air as she spoke. "Our bioforms can reshape themselves for any battlefield. Our living armor repairs itself and adapts to threats. These human machines are static, unchanging, and fragile." Dr. Park tried to interject. "If you would allow us to explain our tactical doctrines and adaptive strategies." "Tactics?" Mordun interrupted, his crystalline form flashing red with what the humans were learning to recognize as contempt. "What tactics could compensate for such technological inferiority? Your vehicles are bound to planetary surfaces while ours soar through space. Your weapons rely on chemical explosions while ours harness the fundamental forces of the universe." Commander Kim stepped forward, his diplomatic training taking over. "Honored council members, we understand that our technology may seem primitive compared to your achievements. However, we believe that diversity of approach." "Diversity?" General Veltar's laugh was like boulders falling down a mountain. "You speak of diversity while showing us the same basic concept repeated across centuries. Metal shells protecting fragile organics, moving slowly across terrain we can simply fly over." The other alien species began voicing their agreement, the chamber filled with hisses, chittering, and flashing lights, as various representatives expressed their amusement at humanity's presentation. Lee felt his face burning with shame and anger, but his military training kept him standing at attention. "The Galactic Council has reached a decision," announced the chamber's central AI, its voice cutting through the alien chatter. "The request for membership by the species known as humans is hereby denied. The applicant species lacks the technological sophistication required for council membership." The formal rejection hit the human delegation like a physical blow. Years of preparation, hopes for peaceful integration into galactic society, and dreams of learning from advanced civilizations crumbled in an instant. General Veltar approached the human delegation, his scaled face showing what might have been pity. "Perhaps in a few thousand years, when your species evolves beyond ground-crawling vehicles, you may reapply. Until then, remain in your small corner of the galaxy and play with your metal toys." Kixna added her own dismissal. "Our scouts report, your colonies use these same primitive vehicles for defense. Against any serious threat, they would prove less effective than natural carapaces. We suggest developing biological alternatives." As the alien representatives began filing out of the chamber, Captain Lee found himself studying each species carefully. He watched how the Saurids moved, noting their proud, upright posture and the way they favored intimidation over flexibility. The insectoids moved in perfect coordination, but seemed to struggle with individual initiative. The energy beings were powerful but appeared limited by their crystalline containers. Dr. Park approached Lee, her face showing the devastation they all felt. "All those years of preparation," she whispered. "All our hopes for peaceful cooperation." "Commander." Kim gathered his team, his voice low but firm. "This is not the end. We return to Earth and report what we have learned. The Council may not want us as allies, But that does not mean our paths will never cross again. As they prepared to leave Nexus Prime, Lee took one last look at the Grand Chamber. The alien representatives were already deep in discussion about other matters, having apparently forgotten about the humans entirely. Their dismissive laughter still echoed in his memory. During the long journey back to Earth, Lee spent hours reviewing recordings of the meeting. He studied every gesture, every reaction, every casual comment the aliens had made. While his colleagues discussed the diplomatic implications of their rejection, Lee focused on something else entirely. They're not as super. 3 months after the humiliating rejection at Nexus Prime, Colonel Yoon Ji-hai stood in the command center of New Seoul, humanity's largest colony world. The planet stretched before her through the reinforced windows, its rolling hills and forests reminiscent of Earth's Korean countryside. Her armored division was conducting routine patrols when the first warnings came through. "Colonel, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching the system," reported Lieutenant Nam Hyun-woo from his position at the sensor station. The young officer's face was pale as he studied the readings. "Whatever's coming, it's big, Yoon." Moved to the tactical display, her experienced eyes quickly analyzing the data. After 20 years of military service, she had developed an instinct for danger, and every alarm in her mind was screaming. "How big are we talking, Lieutenant?" "At least 50 capital ships, ma'am. Configuration unknown, but they're not using any human technology signatures." Sergeant Cho Min-ho, a grizzled veteran who had served with Yoon since her lieutenant days, looked up from his communication console. "Colonel, we're receiving a transmission. It's not in any Earth language, but the translation software is working on it." The main screen flickered to life, showing the scaled face of General Veltar. His emerald coloring had shifted to deeper shades, and his eyes held a predatory gleam that made Yoon's blood run cold. "Humans of New Seoul," Veltar's voice filled the command center. "You have been deemed a potential threat to galactic security. Your rapid expansion and military development cannot be allowed to continue unchecked. Surrender now, and your species will be relocated to a more suitable location, under Council supervision." Yoon felt her jaw clench. After the rejection at Nexus Prime, humanity had focused on expanding their territory and developing their own technologies. Apparently, the Galactic Council had decided this was threatening. "This is Colonel Yoon Ji-hee, commanding officer of New Seoul Defense Force," she replied, activating the transmission system. "This is sovereign human territory. You have no authority here." Veltar's laugh was even more unpleasant over the communication system than it had been in person. "Authority? We are the Galactic Council. We require no authority beyond our own existence. You will surrender, or you will be pacified." The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in tense silence. Specialist Kang Hai-wan, the communications officer, broke the quiet. "Colonel, long-range sensors show the alien fleet is taking attack positions. They'll be in weapons range in 6 hours. Yoon turned to her staff, her mind already shifting into combat mode. "Alert all units. Prepare for defensive operations. Contact Earth Command and request immediate reinforcements." Over the next several hours, New Seoul transformed from a peaceful colony into a fortress. The planet's defensive systems came online, energy shields covering major population centers and military installations. Yoon's armored division, equipped with humanity's most advanced hover tanks and energy weapons, took positions in the hills surrounding the capital city. The human forces represented the best technology Earth could produce. Their hover tanks could fly at high speeds, equipped with plasma cannons and particle beam weapons copied from alien designs they had observed. Energy shields protected both vehicles and infantry. It was a far cry from the primitive ground crawlers they had shown to the Council. When the Saurid attack came, it was devastating in its efficiency. The alien ships descended through New Seoul's atmosphere like silver teardrops, their hulls reflecting the morning sun. They moved with impossible grace, defying gravity as if it were merely a suggestion. Energy weapons lanced down from orbit, striking human positions with precision that spoke of superior targeting systems. "All units, engage," Yoon commanded from her command tank, watching as her forces opened fire. The battle was brief and brutal. Human plasma cannons and particle beams struck alien vehicles, but the energy simply dissipated against their shields. The Saurid hover tanks returned fire with weapons that cut through human defenses like paper through steel. Lieutenant Nam's voice crackled over the radio from his position with the forward elements. "Colonel, our weapons aren't penetrating their yi. Shields, repeat. We cannot penetrate enemy defenses." Sergeant Cho's gruff voice added to the reports of failure. "Eastern perimeter is falling back. We've lost half our hover tanks already. Their weapons are too advanced." Yoon watched helplessly as her forces were systematically destroyed. The Saurids moved with cold precision, their anti-gravity vehicles dancing around human positions while delivering devastating firepower. Every tactical doctrine humanity had developed proved useless against their technological superiority. "Colonel," Specialist Kang called out, her voice tight with stress. "We're receiving a transmission from the Saurid commander." General Veltar's face appeared on screen again, but this time his expression showed mild disappointment rather than anger. "Colonel Yoon, your resistance has been noted and found adequate for a primitive species. However, this demonstration clearly shows the futility of opposing council authority. We're not finished yet," Yoon replied, though she could see her forces continuing to fall back on all fronts. "Oh, but you are," Veltar said, with what might have been sympathy. "Your hover tanks are impressive improvements over the wheeled toys you showed us at Nexus Prime, but they remain crude copies of our own designs from millennia past. Your energy weapons lack the sophistication to penetrate our defenses, and your tactics are predictably linear." The Saurid general gestured to something off-screen. "Observe." On the tactical display, Yoon could see Saurid forces moving in complex, three-dimensional patterns, using their superior mobility to attack from unexpected angles. Her own forces, despite their training, were thinking in terms of ground-based warfare, unable to fully adapt to the reality of true three-dimensional combat. "Your species shows promise," Veltar continued, "but you remain trapped by your evolutionary origins. You think like ground-dwelling creatures, because that is what you are. Accept your limitations, and this can end peacefully." Yoon's response was cut short as an explosion rocked her command tank. Warning lights flashed as her vehicle's energy shield failed under sustained fire. Around her, the remaining human forces were being pushed back toward the city. "All units fall back to secondary positions," she ordered, knowing it was a delaying action at best. The retreat was orderly, but desperate. Human soldiers abandoned their positions under the overwhelming firepower of the Saurid advance. The alien forces pressed forward with mechanical precision, their superior technology making the outcome inevitable. Lieutenant Nam's tank exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The young officer's last transmission cut short. Sergeant Cho's gruff voice provided a running commentary of the disaster. "Western approach compromised. Southern perimeter collapsing. Colonel, we need a miracle." But no miracle came. Within hours, the human defense of New Seoul had crumbled. Yoon found herself in the ruins of her command center, surrounded by the few survivors of her once proud armored division. "Colonel," Specialist Kang said, working frantically at her damaged communication equipment, "I've managed to establish contact with Earth Command." General Lim Jae-sung's weathered face appeared on the screen, the transmission crackling with interference. "Colonel Yoon, report your status." "Sir, New Seoul has fallen. Enemy forces have demonstrated complete technological superiority. Our modern weapons and tactics proved ineffective against their advanced systems." Yoon's voice was steady despite the defeat. "Requesting immediate reinforcement with our most advanced available technology." General Lim was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Behind him, Yoon could see other officers moving with urgent purpose. "Colonel, reinforcements are being prepared, however, they may not be what you expect." "Sir, we've been analyzing the data from your engagement. The enemy's technology is indeed superior to our modern systems. However, our scientists have made an interesting discovery about their defensive capabilities." General Lim leaned forward, his voice taking on an intensity that Yoon had rarely heard. "Their shields and armor are specifically designed to counter energy-based weapons and advanced Propulsion systems. They've evolved their defenses to fight wars similar to their own technological approach. I don't understand, sir. Colonel, the enemy has adapted to fight advanced civilizations using advanced methods. They may not be prepared for a more traditional approach. The transmission began breaking up as Saurid jammers increased their interference. General Lim's final words came through in fragments. Hold your position, Colonel. Help is coming. And Colonel, prepare your people for something they've never seen before. The screen went dark, leaving Yoon and her survivors alone in the ruins of their command center. Outside, Saurid forces were establishing occupation zones, their anti-gravity vehicles floating serenely above the conquered city. Colonel, Sergeant Cho asked, what do you think the general meant? Yoon stared out at the alien occupiers, her mind working through the implications of General Lim's words. A traditional approach? What could be more traditional than energy? Weapons and hover tanks? Then she remembered Captain Lee Taemin's presentation at Nexus Prime. The aliens had laughed at humanity's primitive armored vehicles, dismissing them as obsolete relics. They had focused entirely on... General Lim Jae-sung stood in the vast underground facility beneath the Korean peninsula, a place that had not seen activity for over a century. The massive doors groaned open, revealing row upon row of ancient military vehicles covered in protective sheeting. Dust motes danced in the pale light as automated systems hummed to life for the first time in decades. Sir, Chief Engineer Bae Soo-jin said, consulting her tablet as they walked between the silent machines. We've located and cataloged over 3,000 vehicles from the museum collections and storage facilities worldwide. Most are in remarkable condition thanks to the preservation systems. Lim nodded, pulling back a cover to reveal the angular hull of a Korean K-2 Black Panther tank. The vehicle looked primitive compared to modern hover tanks, but something about its solid, purposeful design appealed to him. And the restoration timeline? With our current manufacturing capabilities, we can have the first wave operational within 2 weeks, Bae replied. We're retrofitting them with modern power sources, communications, and life support systems, while maintaining their original weapon and armor configurations. Master Sergeant Oh Kyung-soo approached from deeper in the facility, his weathered face showing a mixture of nostalgia and excitement. At 65, he was one of the few soldiers still in service who had trained on traditional tracked vehicles before the military's complete transition to hover technology. General, Oh said, saluting crisply, I've been reviewing the technical, manuals and training materials. The old tactics are all there, archived but intact. Combined arms doctrine, fire and movement, hull-down positions, enfilade fire patterns. Everything the modern army forgot when we went to energy weapons and anti-gravity. Lim walked among the silent machines, his mind processing the implications of what they were attempting. Sergeant, in your opinion, can we train enough crews to operate these effectively? Oh's grin was sharp as a blade. Sir, I trained on these systems for 15 years before the transition. Tank warfare is tank warfare, whether you're using chemical propellant or plasma. The principles don't change: cover, concealment, fire superiority, and mobility. But with these old systems, mobility means something different. They stopped beside a massive American M1A3 Abrams tank, its bulk dwarfing the nearby hover tanks. Private Han Bo-ram, a young soldier assigned to the restoration project, looked up from where she was studying the tank's main gun. Sir, she said, hesitantly, I don't understand how these old machines can be effective against alien technology. They're so heavy and slow. Oh laughed, his hand patting the tank's thick armor. Private, that's exactly the point. These aliens have spent millennia fighting opponents who use anti-gravity and energy weapons. Their tactics, their defenses, their entire way of thinking about warfare is built around that technology. Bae pointed to her tablet, showing technical specifications. The alien shields we observed at New Seoul are specifically designed to dissipate energy-based attacks. But these old tanks use kinetic energy weapons, solid projectiles accelerated by chemical explosives or electromagnetic force. Think of it this way, Private, General Lim explained. If you've spent your entire life defending against swords, you might not know how to stop a club. The restoration work proceeded at a frantic pace, Human engineers swarmed over the ancient vehicles, installing modern power cells where old engines once rumbled. Advanced communication systems were integrated with original targeting computers. Life support systems, designed for space warfare, were fitted into cramped crew compartments. But the weapons remained unchanged. The massive 120mm guns of the main battle tanks, the smaller cannons of infantry fighting vehicles, even the individual small arms of the support troops. All of it used the same basic principle humans had employed for centuries: accelerate a solid object to high velocity and let physics do the rest. The beauty of kinetic weapons, O explained to a group of trainees, is their simplicity. No complex energy matrices to disrupt, no exotic particles to deflect. Just mass times velocity equals dead enemy. Private Han was one of dozens of young soldiers learning to operate systems their grandparents would have recognized. The training was intensive but straightforward. Tank crews learned to think in terms of terrain features and hull-down positions rather than three-dimensional flight patterns. Remember, O instructed during a gunnery exercise, these tanks can't fly, but they can hide. Use the ground to your advantage. A hill that blocks the enemy's line of sight is worth more than any energy shield. The first restored vehicle to roll out of the facility was a Korean K-2, its tracks churning across the test range with mechanical precision. The sound was different from modern vehicles, a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the Earth itself rather than the whisper-quiet hum of anti-gravity systems. General Lim watched from the observation bunker as the tank maneuvered through the course. Its movement was deliberate, purposeful, unlike the dancing flight patterns of hover tanks. When it fired its main gun, the sound was like thunder, a sharp crack followed by a rolling boom that echoed across the range. Impressive, Bay said, checking her readings. The kinetic energy delivery is enormous. These projectiles have over 10 times the mass of our standard plasma charges, and they're much harder to stop, O added with satisfaction. Energy shields work by dispersing or redirecting force, but you can't redirect a solid chunk of depleted uranium traveling at 5,000 meters per second. You either stop it completely, or it goes right through. The training expanded rapidly as more vehicles came online. Tank crews learned to work with infantry in ways that had been forgotten for generations. Artillery units practiced coordinated fire missions using ballistic projectiles instead of energy weapons. Engineers relearned the art of constructing field fortifications designed to protect ground-based vehicles. Private Han found herself assigned as a gunner in one of the lead tanks, her natural aptitude for targeting systems making her invaluable despite her initial skepticism. "Sergeant O," she said during a break in training, "I'm starting to understand what you meant about these machines being different." "How so, Private?" "The hover tanks we trained on before, they were fast and agile, but they were also fragile. One good hit and they were done. These old tanks, they can take damage and keep fighting." O nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Modern warfare became about avoiding being hit because the weapons were so powerful. But these old systems were designed for slugfests. Thick armor, redundant systems, and the ability to keep fighting even when damaged. The restoration project's scope expanded beyond just tanks. Human engineers began retrofitting artillery pieces, armored personnel carriers, and even individual weapon systems. The principle remained the same: kinetic energy weapons using solid projectiles. "Sir," Bay reported to General Lim during one of their daily briefings, "we've received intelligence reports from our agents near New Seoul. The Saurid occupation forces are using standard energy-based defensive systems. Their vehicles rely entirely on energy shields and advanced alloys designed to dissipate heat and electromagnetic effects. And our assessment of their vulnerability to kinetic attacks? Significant, sir. Their shields show no adaptation for solid projectile impacts. Their armor, while advanced, appears to be optimized for energy weapons. We believe our restored vehicles will have a substantial tactical advantage." General Lim studied the tactical displays showing the growing fleet of restored vehicles. Hundreds of tanks, artillery pieces, and support vehicles were already operational, with thousands more in various stages of restoration. "What about crew training?" Master Sergeant O stepped forward. "Sir, we have enough trained crews for the first wave. The soldiers are adapting quickly to the old systems. There's something about these machines that appeals to human nature. They're direct, honest, and reliable. Honest? General Lim asked. Yes, sir. With a hover tank, you're always managing power distribution, shield harmonics, and energy weapon heat buildup. With these old tanks, you point the gun and pull the trigger. The tank goes where you tell it to go and shoots what you tell it to shoot. No computers trying to second-guess your decisions. Private Han had become something of an expert on the differences between old and new systems. The targeting is simpler, too, she added. Instead of calculating plasma dispersion patterns and energy focus, you just account for projectile drop and target movement. The computer does the math, but the principle is easy to understand. The first wave of restored vehicles was ready for deployment within the promised 2 weeks. General Lim stood in the departure bay, watching as massive transport ships loaded, hundreds of ancient war machines. The sight was surreal. 23rd century starships carrying tanks that would have been familiar to soldiers from centuries past. General, O said, approaching with his gear bag. Permission to accompany the first wave to New Seoul. Granted, Sergeant. Colonel Yoon will need every experienced operator she can get. As the transport ships prepared for departure, Bei made her final report. Sir, all vehicles are equipped with modern communication systems, enhanced targeting, computers, and improved armor materials. But the core systems remain unchanged from their original specifications. Kinetic energy weapons, tracked or wheeled propulsion, and conventional armor protection. General, the dawn sky over New Seoul was clear and cold when the first human transport ships began their descent. Colonel Yoon Ji-hai watched from her hidden position in the hills overlooking the occupied city, her remaining forces scattered in concealment around the landing zones. For 3 months they had conducted a stubborn resistance against the Sorid occupation, but their modern weapons had proven largely ineffective against alien technology. Colonel, Sergeant Cho whispered, pressing his binoculars to his eyes. Whatever's in those transports, it's big. I can hear heavy mechanical sounds like nothing I've heard before. The massive transport ships touched down in the designated zones, their landing jets kicking up clouds of dust and debris. As the cargo ramps lowered, an unfamiliar sound echoed across the battlefield, a deep mechanical rumbling that seemed to come from the Earth itself. The first vehicle to emerge from the transport was unlike anything the defenders had seen in modern warfare. The K-2 Black Panther tank rolled down the ramp on steel tracks, its angular hull and massive main gun giving it a purposeful predatory appearance. Behind it came dozens more, a parade of ancient war machines that belonged in museums rather than battlefields. Captain Ryu Seong-min, leading the first company of restored tanks, spoke into his radio as his vehicle cleared the transport. All units, this is Thunder 6. We are operational and moving to assigned positions. Remember your training and trust your machines. Private Han Bo-ram, now a seasoned gunner despite her initial doubts, peered through her tank's periscope at the alien occupation forces in the distance. Sir, the Swords are definitely noticing us. I can see their hover tanks moving to intercept. In the Sword Command Center, General Veltar studied the tactical displays with growing amusement. His scaled features shifted to lighter colors, indicating his pleasure at this development. What are the humans thinking? He asked his tactical officer. They bring us ground-crawling vehicles from their primitive past, after we demonstrated the futility of their modern technology. The tactical officer, a younger Saurid with bright green scales, consulted his instruments. General, our sensors indicate approximately 200 vehicles of unknown configuration. They appear to be using chemical propulsion and metal armor, similar to the museum pieces they showed us at Nexus Prime. Veltar's laugh was like rocks grinding together. Excellent. Deploy the 3rd Hover Regiment to deal with this pathetic last stand. Let us finish this charade quickly so we can report complete pacification to the Council. The Saurid response was swift and confident. 50 sleek hover tanks rose from their positions around the city, their anti-gravity systems allowing them to move in graceful arcs through the sky. Their energy shields shimmered in the morning light as they approached the human landing zones. Captain Ryu watched the alien approach through his tank's targeting system. All units, enemy contact bearing 090. Range 4,000 meters. And closing. Prepare for engagement. Master Sergeant Oh Kyung-soo, commanding a supporting unit, felt a familiar calm settle over him as the battle approached. Just like the old days, he murmured, then spoke into his radio. Remember, these aliens expect us to fight like their other enemies. Stay low, use the terrain, and let them come to us. The first exchange of fire revealed the fundamental difference between the two forces. Saurid energy weapons lanced toward the human positions, but many of the shots passed harmlessly overhead as the low-profile tanks sheltered behind hills and ridges. The aliens, accustomed to fighting opponents who could fly, had trouble adjusting their targeting to ground-based vehicles that used terrain for protection. Thunder 6, this is Thunder 2-1, came Private Han's voice over the radio. I have a clear shot on the lead hover tank. Permission to engage? Permission granted, all units weapons free. The K2's main gun fired with a sound like controlled thunder. The 120mm kinetic penetrator, a solid dart of depleted uranium, accelerated to enormous velocity, streaked across the battlefield in a flat trajectory. It struck the lead Saurid hover tank dead center. The result was spectacular and completely unexpected. The alien vehicle's energy shield, designed to dissipate plasma and particle beams, offered no resistance to the solid projectile. The penetrator punched through the shield as if it didn't exist, then continued through the hover tank's advanced armor, which had been optimized to resist energy weapons rather than kinetic impacts. The Saurid vehicle exploded in a brilliant fireball, its anti-gravity systems failing catastrophically as the projectile destroyed its core systems. Debris rained down across the battlefield as the wreckage crashed to the ground. Target destroyed, Han reported, her voice filled with amazement. Sir, their shields didn't stop it at all. The effect on both forces was immediate. The human crews, who had harbored secret doubts about their ancient weapons, suddenly realized they had a real chance. The Saurid formation, witnessing the impossible destruction of one of their most advanced vehicles by a primitive kinetic weapon, hesitated in confusion. General Veltar's voice crackled over the Saurid communication network, his tone showing the first hint of concern. Report. How did a primitive projectile weapon penetrate our shields? The surviving hover tank commanders struggled to provide answers. Their shields were functioning perfectly, but somehow the human weapons were passing right through them. In their technological arrogance, they had optimized their defenses for the kinds of weapons used by advanced civilizations. Captain Ryu pressed the advantage, his training in traditional tank warfare serving him well. All units advance by fire and movement. Use hull-down positions and mutual support. These targets can fly, but they can't hide. The human tanks began a methodical advance, using terrain features to mask their movements while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. When a Saurid hover tank tried to use its superior mobility to flank the human formation, it would find itself under fire from multiple directions, by enemies it couldn't see until too late. Sergeant First Class Im Da-un, commanding a reconnaissance unit, provided crucial intelligence from her concealed position. Thunder 6, this is Scout 1. Enemy vehicles are showing signs of panic. They're breaking formation and attacking individually. This was exactly what Master Sergeant O had hoped for. All units, the enemy is losing cohesion. Maintain disciplined fire and movement. Don't let them regroup. The battle developed into a series of individual engagements as the Saurid formation disintegrated. Their hover tanks, designed for three-dimensional combat against similarly mobile opponents, found themselves outmaneuvered by ground-based vehicles that used terrain and mutual support to compensate for their lack of flight capability. Corporal Shin Woo-jin, serving as gunner in one of the lead tanks, scored hit after hit against alien targets. It's like they don't understand how to fight us, he reported. They keep trying to get above us, but we just back into defilade and hit them from unexpected angles. The psychological impact on the Saurid forces was devastating. For millennia, they had relied on their technological superiority to dominate enemies. The idea that primitive kinetic weapons could simply ignore their most advanced defenses was incomprehensible. General, the Saurid tactical officer reported, his voice tight with stress. We've lost 12 hover tanks. The human projectile, Weapons are penetrating our shields without resistance. Our armor appears ineffective against solid impacts at these velocities. General Veltar studied the tactical display in growing disbelief. His advanced forces were being systematically destroyed by weapons that should have been obsolete millions of years ago. Deploy additional units. These primitive vehicles must have some weakness we can exploit. But the weakness wasn't in the human equipment. It was in the sordid understanding of warfare itself. They had become so specialized in fighting opponents who used similar technologies that they had forgotten how to adapt to completely different approaches. The human advance continued with mechanical precision. Tank crews who had trained for weeks on systems their ancestors would have recognized fought with the confidence that came from understanding their equipment completely. There were no complex energy matrices to manage, no exotic particles to maintain. Point the gun, pull the trigger, and let physics do the work. Thunder 6, this is Artillery 1, came a new voice on the radio. We have the enemy command post located and are ready to provide fire support. The artillery support came from restored self-propelled guns using traditional ballistic projectiles. When their shells began falling around the sordid command center, the aliens discovered another weakness in their defensive systems. Their shields could stop energy weapons, but high explosive shells created physical shock waves that passed right through energy barriers. General Veltar felt his command post shake as human artillery found its range. Impossible, he muttered, watching his instruments flicker as shockwaves disrupted delicate alien systems. How are chemical explosives affecting our equipment? The answer was simple but revolutionary. The Sards had spent so long fighting wars with clean energy weapons that they had forgotten the crude effectiveness of high explosives. Their systems, optimized for electromagnetic interference and energy dispersion, were vulnerable to the simple physics of expanding gases and flying metal fragments. Colonel Yoon, Monitor. 6 months after the liberation of New Seoul, Admiral Park Yoon-seo stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, watching as representatives from a dozen alien species waited for permission to board. The irony was not lost on her. These were the same civilizations that had laughed at human military technology less than a year ago. Admiral, her communications officer reported, the Keltharian delegation is requesting an immediate audience. They say their home system is under attack by a rogue AI collective, and they need human military advisors. Park nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the current state of galactic warfare. Since news of the New Seoul victory had spread, the galaxy had descended into chaos. Species that had relied entirely on energy-based warfare suddenly found themselves vulnerable to opponents who had adapted different approaches. General Yoon Ji-hai, recently promoted after her successful defense of New Seoul, approached the admiral's station. Her uniform bore new decorations, awards from grateful governments across the galaxy who had witnessed the impossible victory of primitive weapons over advanced technology. Ma'am, Yoon said, the situation reports are getting worse. The Hive, Queens are requesting assistance against the crystal beings. The energy collective is being overrun by the metal shapers. Every major power in the galaxy is discovering that their specialized warfare doctrines have critical weaknesses. Park smiled grimly. And they all want to hire human military advisors to teach them our primitive methods. The truth was more complex than the aliens realized. Humanity's victory at New Seoul hadn't been just about kinetic weapons defeating energy shields. It had been about tactical flexibility, about understanding that there was no single correct way to fight a war. Captain Lee Taemin, now serving as the fleet's strategic advisor, joined the conversation. Admiral, we've received formal requests for military consultation from 47 different governments. They're offering everything from technology transfers to territorial concessions. What's our response? President Moon has authorized us to provide limited assistance but with conditions. We're not interested in becoming the galaxy's mercenaries. We want full membership in the Galactic Council and recognition of human territorial sovereignty. The first delegation to board was from the Keltharian Republic, a species of tall crystalline beings who had once dismissed human technology as barbarically crude. Their leader, Silenth, approached Admiral Park with what passed for humility among his people. Admiral Park, Silenth said, his crystalline form pulsing with subdued light. "We come seeking your assistance in desperate circumstances. Our AI collective has developed countermeasures for all our traditional warfare methods. We need alternative approaches." Dr. Park So-young, now serving as chief negotiator for human interests, stepped forward. "Ambassador Silenth, we remember your species' assessment of human military capabilities at Nexus Prime. What has changed?" The crystalline being's light dimmed with what appeared to be embarrassment. "We underestimated the value of diversity in military doctrine. Our enemies have adapted to counter our energy-based weapons. We need to learn your kinetic combat methods." This conversation was repeated dozens of times over the following weeks. Species after species arrived at human space stations, their previous arrogance replaced by desperate need. The galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about the dangers of technological specialization. Master Sergeant Oh Kyung-soo found himself in the unlikely position of instructor to alien cadets. His classroom on the Human Military Academy ship was filled with beings who had once considered themselves superior to humanity. The key to understanding human warfare, Oh explained to his mixed species class, is that we never threw anything away. While your civilizations advanced by replacing old methods with new ones, humans kept everything. A young Saurid officer, scales bright with curiosity, raised his hand. "Instructor, oh, why would you preserve obsolete techniques?" Oh smiled, gesturing to the historical display behind him. "Because we learned that obsolete and useless are not the same thing. Your people mastered energy weapons and anti-gravity, propulsion, excellent technologies. But you forgot that sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective." The display showed the evolution of human warfare, from ancient swords and shields to modern plasma cannons. But unlike other species, military histories, the human timeline showed continuous development rather than replacement. "We still teach sword fighting to our officers," Oh continued. "Not because we expect them to use swords in space combat, but because the principles of close combat apply to all warfare. We still study ancient siege tactics because sometimes you need to think about defense in depth rather than just shield strength." Colonel Yoon, now running the expanded military advisory program, found herself teaching concepts that seemed elementary to humans, but revolutionary to aliens. Her current class included representatives from 12 different species, all struggling to understand human military philosophy. "The Romans had a saying," she explained, "if you want peace, prepare for war." But they also understood that preparation meant more than just having the best weapons. It meant understanding your enemy, adapting to circumstances, and being ready for any situation. A Hive Queen representative speaking through one of her warrior drones asked, "But how do you maintain tactical coherence without collective consciousness? How do individual units coordinate complex maneuvers?" "Through training, doctrine, and trust," Yoon replied. "Our soldiers learn to think independently while working toward common goals. They can adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders from higher command." This concept was perhaps the most difficult for the aliens to grasp. Most galactic species had evolved either hive minds, energy-based collective consciousness, or rigid hierarchical structures. The idea of individual initiative within a disciplined framework was foreign to them. Private Han Bo-ram, now promoted to sergeant, found herself demonstrating tank tactics to alien observers who watched in fascination as human crews maneuvered their primitive vehicles through complex scenarios. "Watch how they use terrain," observed Kixna, the insectoid representative who had once mocked human technology at Nexus Prime. "Their vehicles cannot fly, so they make the ground itself their ally." The demonstration showed human tanks using hills, forests, and urban areas to mask their movements, appearing suddenly to strike alien targets before disappearing again. The aliens' advanced sensors, designed to track high-energy signatures and anti-gravity propulsion, had difficulty following the low-tech human vehicles. "It's not just the technology," Sergeant Han explained to the observers. "It's the mindset. We think about what the ground can do for us, not just how to fly over it." President Moon Sang-wook addressed the emergency session of the Galactic Council 6 months after the Battle of New Seoul. The grand chamber that had once echoed with alien laughter at human presentations now listened in respectful silence. Honored representatives, President Moon began. Humanity seeks not dominance but partnership. We offer our military knowledge freely to any species willing to share theirs in return. General Veltar, his scales now showing the muted colors of respect rather than arrogance, stood to address the assembly. The Saurid Empire formally requests full membership for humanity in the Galactic Council. We have learned that technological advancement without tactical wisdom leads to dangerous vulnerabilities. The vote was unanimous. Every species that had once dismissed humanity as primitive now recognized the value of their approach to warfare. But more than that, they had begun to understand what Captain Lee had realized months earlier during that first humiliating presentation. Dr. Park So-young took the podium for humanity's acceptance speech. We thank the Council for this recognition, but we want to be clear about what we bring to this alliance. It's not just our weapons or our tactics, it's our philosophy. She gestured to the historical displays showing human military development. Every species in this chamber evolved by specializing, by perfecting single approaches to problems. Humanity survived by remembering everything. We kept our ancient wisdom while embracing new knowledge. The final scene played out in Captain Lee's new office aboard the Council's military academy station. He was reviewing applications from young officers across the galaxy, all wanting to study at the Human War College. A soft chime announced a visitor. Morden, the energy being who had once dismissed human technology as primitive, flickered into the office in his crystalline container. Captain Lee, Morden said, his light patterns showing deep respect. I wanted to apologize for our species behavior at Nexus Prime. We failed to understand what you were truly showing us. Lee set down his tablet and studied the alien. What do you think we were showing you? At first we thought you were displaying primitive technology. Then we believed you were demonstrating kinetic weapons. But now I understand the truth. Which, as Morden's light shifted to patterns Lee had learned, indicated wonder. You were showing us institutional memory. Every human weapon, every tactic, every lesson learned in blood, preserved and ready for use. We saw ancient machines, but you were displaying eternal wisdom. Lee nodded slowly. Every species in the galaxy mastered their environment by becoming specialists. You became beings of purr,